There were very few cattle here in South Carolina, and then they brought some cattle down from Virginia. And then the young youngsters would raise the cattle. The white youngsters would raise the cattle. And for several years, they raised the cattle. And what they did was, at the end of during the latter part of the fall, they would stop taking the cattle, and they'd have enough food for them to feed them, and they would kill off a good portion of the cattle because they didn't have enough feed. They did that the first 2 or 3 years using whites. Then they decided to start using the slave boys. And they did that, and the slave boys did it. They, having knowledge of cattle raising in Africa, at the end of the year, they didn't kill the cattle because they knew there was enough food around to keep them going. So now, as the cattle began to grow, and at that time, the wealthy people wanted to start moving away from the coast, who weren't involved in rice or whatnot. And so as a result, when they took the cattle along with them, and when they got to probably the South Carolina border, they decided that they were going to grow more and more cattle because the cattle was really growing in amounts. And
Which border?
The South Carolina border, the western South Carolina border. And so as time, some of the owners discussed that their cattle was growing so much, they ought to be able to ship it north and make more money. And so they started doing that. And then the cattle grew and grew and grew, and it was the slaves, the boys, and that's why they call them cowboys. Then the cattle started going into ship cattle into Texas to grow and up north, and that was how the cattle industry took off. And that was one of the most important areas, especially in that area, up until probably the end of the Revolutionary War. And then it kept growing, and they shipped the cattle, and that's how the cattle industry started in this country.